good, Devin. Thank you. If I wasn't Baptist, I'd have got up and danced. Plus the fact that I don't know how. So. Well, we're in Matthew chapter 23 now. The title of the sermon this morning is Bad Religion in Jesus. And I have to admit to you that on Friday afternoon, after Kathleen had already printed all the bulletins and already folded them all up and put them all over the church, I was poking around on Google and realized that Bad Religion is the name of a 1980s punk rock band. I've always heard, and I believe it's true, that Jesus hung around with sinners, but I'm not saying this morning that he joined a rock band, okay? Bad religion in Jesus. You know, there is a sense in our culture that religion, spirituality, church, whatever tag you want to put on it, is being scrutinized like never before with a skeptical eye. And in some ways that's good. In some ways it goes overboard, but it is sad, isn't it, that the very place that people should go for healing sometimes is a place where they go and get harmed even more. And unfortunately that does happen in church. And Jesus rarely got upset. There was only a couple of occasions in the Bible where he really got upset. You know, people that don't get mad, people get mad all the time. When they get mad, you don't notice it. It's just, okay, that's so-and-so. But when somebody that doesn't get mad hardly at all gets upset, then you notice that. It hits the radar screen. And Jesus pretty well takes off on the religious leaders of his day in this chapter. We're going to look at the first 12 verses this morning. Get your Bible out, your New Testament. Matthew 23, verses 1 through 12 this morning. Get your bulletin out if you would, please. We'll take a few notes as we go along. Here's how it starts. Matthew says, Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in the chair of Moses. So whatever they tell you, do it and keep it. But their works, don't do them. But they speak and they don't act. Now that last phrase, I think, is rendered really well by the NIV. If you're looking at an NIV this morning, it says something like this: they don't practice what they preach. And that pretty much gets the idea of what Jesus said there. Then he goes on in verse 4. He says, everything that they do is done, verse 4, not verse 5. Verse 4, he says they tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they won't move a finger to move them themselves. All right, so Jesus is changing. He's changing the people that he's talking to here. Notice in verse 1, then he began to speak to the crowds and to his disciples. Up until this point, in the last couple of chapters, we have this long dialogue, this confrontation between Jesus and the religious leaders, the ones that he's about to lambast in this chapter. And they had a battle back and forth, and finally Jesus silenced them at the end of chapter 22, and now he shifts gears. Now he's talking to the crowds who have been watching and listening to everything that just happened, and to his disciples as well. His disciples are the ones who have already chosen to follow him. The crowd are the ones who aren't sure yet. They haven't made commitments. They're always there. They're just listening. Listen this morning. You may be part of the crowd today. You haven't made the decision yet. You haven't stepped out and said, I want to be one of the disciples, but I'm drawn to what's happening with Christianity, with Jesus. I'm curious about it. I want you to listen carefully to what Jesus has to say today, and I'm praying that God's Spirit during the next few minutes will speak to your heart, and you will be willing to take that step this morning and say, I don't just want to be part of the crowd anymore. I want to be one of Jesus' followers. I want to be one of the disciples. Now, look what Jesus says. It says that they sit in Moses' seat. What does he mean by that? Well, Moses, who lived more than 1,000 years before Jesus said these words, was given the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. And so Moses is considered, rightly so, to be the lawgiver. He was the one who was given the law, and then he gave it to the people. And Moses is a very big and respected name among these religious leaders, these scribes and Pharisees. Scribes were people who knew the Bible. Pharisees were people who tried to follow Scripture, but they had gotten off track. And Jesus is going to tell us how throughout this chapter. But they were the ones who had the position of authority. They were the ones who taught the Bible. And we must remember that these folks that were listening to Jesus did not own Bibles. Okay? No printing press. Everything that was written was painstakingly written out by hand. Long documents were very difficult to write out. It took forever. It was very costly. And so the vast majority of people did not have documents like the Bible. The only place that they could go and hear the Bible was to go to the synagogue or to go to the temple. And so they were dependent on people like these scribes to tell them what God's Word says. And Jesus is recognizing that. He's saying, look, they sit in Moses' seat, so listen to what they tell you and do what they tell you. But he says, don't do what they do. Because, essentially, what Jesus is saying here is they're a bunch of hypocrites. They don't practice what they preach. They say one thing and they do something else. And when they're talking about the Bible, when they're talking about the law, and they're saying what God says, listen to that and do it. But be careful because they're not applying it properly in their own lives. He gives us this example in verse 4. It's a figurative example. He says that they tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders. What does he mean by that? Well, what he means is that they were very legalistic in their approach to the Bible. It started out with the right idea. The right idea was, we have this command. Let's take adultery, for instance. We have a command that tells us not to commit adultery. Well, what can we do to make sure that we don't commit adultery? Well, let's make up a bunch of rules around the command to create sort of a fence around the command, to protect it, so that we won't even ever get close to breaking the command itself. And so they came up with all kinds of details about how men and women were supposed to interact with one another, almost to the point where they couldn't in public. They had some strange ideas about women. And so they ended up adding a lot of rules that really weren't in the law. They weren't given by God through Moses. And it made it almost impossible to live daily life. An example is when they saw Jesus and his disciples on their way to synagogue on a Sabbath, and the disciples were hungry, so they took some heads of grain, rolled them in their hands, and ate them. And the disciples, the Pharisees said, they can't do that. They can't do that because what they're doing constitutes work, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, so you're breaking the Sabbath. And Jesus wasn't too happy with them about that. They had broadened the application of the law, which was good, to a point where it was almost impossible for people to live their lives. People didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter if they were hungry. In fact, they didn't want Jesus to heal people on the Sabbath in the synagogue. They wanted people to have to wait till the next day to be healed. And Jesus says, you have completely lost track of what the whole point of the law is for. The law is not some abstract thing that we bow down to. The law is given to us so that we have a relationship with God, and it's to lift people up. It's to bring people into God's presence and open a pathway to God, not to block the pathway off. But they were doing the latter. They put these big loads on people's shoulders. That's what he's talking about. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy and light. He has one. Jesus isn't just saying to us here, throw off all the commands and the rules, forget about it, just do what your heart tells you. He never says that. Because he knows that our hearts need to be changed. Our hearts need to be saved. And so these regulations and rules and commands that God gives us, properly used and applied, are good. But they're like any powerful tool. It can be used for good, but it can also be used for evil. If these men were using a tool that was meant to lift people up, they were using it to press them down. Jesus goes on in verse 5. He says, everything that they do is done to be seen. They make their phylacteries wide. They make their tassels long. They love to sit in the seat of honor at banquets, in the most important seats in the synagogue, to be greeted in the marketplace, to be called rabbi. Now, he's getting some rapid fire stuff going here, and it lasts for the rest of the chapter. Some of the most content-rich teaching of Jesus is actually in this chapter. Once the dam breaks, he lets it all out. He sees so much in what these guys are doing that outrages him, because they are impeding what he is trying to do, to build that relationship between God and people, to break down the barriers. And here are the guys that are building a lot of those barriers. And so he is enraged by that, and he expresses his anger. Look what he says that they do. First of all, he says they do everything to be seen. Everything's about them. It's not about the others. It's not even really about the law or about God. They just want to be seen by others, want to impress other people. They make their phylacteries wide. Phylacteries were little leather boxes that they would put pieces of Scripture in. Now, they may not have had the whole Bible, but people did have little pieces of Scripture, maybe a single verse or whatever. And they would put them in these little leather boxes, and they would wrap them around their left arm so it was close to their heart. And they would wrap them around their head so it was close to their eyes. And they would wear them during their prayer time as a reminder of God's Word. These guys, apparently what they did is they would put them on and wear them all the time. Because they wanted everybody to see just how holy they really were. And Jesus says, all you're doing is showing off. You're just trying to impress everybody with your phylactery. The tassels were something that also, the phylacteries were not bad. He wasn't saying the phylacteries were bad. He didn't say throw them out. They actually come from Old Testament passages. In the Old Testament said, I want you to wear this certain kind of tassel on the bottom of your garment, and every time you see it, I want you to think about where you're going. I want you to think about me. I want you to think about whether or not you're walking in my pathways or not. So what started out as a good thing became something for them to show off at a banquet. You know, when you're invited to a banquet, the person who's being honored, and the place of honor is to sit right next to them. And they always thought that they were the most important person there, that they had to go and sit at that place. What did Jesus tell us about that? He said, when you show up at a banquet, do what? Sit way down here in the unimportant seats. Okay? Because if you go over here and you sit in an important seat, what's going to happen? Somebody more important than you is going to show up in front of everybody. The host is going to have to come up and go, excuse me, I'm going to have to ask you to move down. Because you don't belong here. And you're going to be humiliated. But apparently they had such a high opinion of themselves, they couldn't even imagine that somebody would show up that was more important than they were. And so they just come walking in and sit in the most important place. Well, that's bad enough. But then at church, synagogue, they want to sit in the front, where everybody can see them and see how holy and pious they are. You know, we've got that figured out, don't we? As Baptists, we've got that figured out. Because we always start where? Absolutely, you know. So you people sitting up here in front, you must have just come late. Baptists have read this text. We got this one down. He said they love to be greeted in the markets. Now, the greeting he's talking about is not, hey, how's it going? How you doing? These were very formal greetings, not like the ones that we do. These are like when you invite somebody up on the platform to speak type of greetings. But they wanted that just out in the marketplace, and they wanted to be called Rabbi. Rabbi, Rab, great, mine. It really means my great one. When you call somebody Rabbi, you're saying my great one. And they love it when people call them my great one. So what is Jesus telling us here? Let's write down our first sentence here. He is telling us two things about these folks that he doesn't like. One is they're hypocritical. They say what they don't do. The other is that they're arrogant. They want everybody to focus in on them. They want all the attention to be about them. Even when it's something as important as God, church, Bible, it's still all supposed to be about them. So Jesus is telling us, let's write this down, that hypocrisy and arrogance are signs of bad religion. Hypocrisy and arrogance are signs of bad religion. If there's a group that claims to be representing Jesus, and it's full of hypocrisy, and the people are arrogant, then there's problems that need to be addressed. Okay? None of us are perfect. I'm sure that, well, I won't speak for you, I'll speak for me. I could never claim that I have never been a hypocrite in my life. Just couldn't do it. I'm sure that I have. And so these are not absolutes. They are goals to shoot towards. But some people are more hypocritical than others, aren't they? I mean, some people are just hypocritical all the time. We should recognize the hypocrisy in us when it's there and work to get rid of it. Recognize the arrogance, the selfishness, the self-centeredness, and work to get rid of that rather than nurturing it by the way that we do church. All right, so Jesus talks to the disciples now, look at verse 8. He says, but you all are not to be called rabbi. One is your teacher, and you are brothers, literally. But the word would also encompass the women. So we would say today that you all are brothers and sisters. Don't call anyone on earth Father. One is your Father, the one who is in heaven. Verse 10, nor are you all to be called masters. One is your master, the Christ. Now, as I've read through that, some of you noticed in your Bible that there are some different words. There's a little bit of confusion that has gone on in our English Bibles. In verse 8, it says, don't be called rabbi. Everybody agrees with that. Because you have one didaskalos. Now, didaskalos almost always is rendered in the Bible as teacher. But in this particular case, some of our English Bibles, the older NIV, for instance, instead of using the word teacher, they use the word master here because they're making it parallel to the word rabbi, which means my great one. The confusion or the struggle with the English translators is evidenced in the difference between the old edition of the NIV and the new edition of the NIV because they changed the way that they rendered this word. But the underlying word, let's not get caught in the details. The underlying word is didaskalos. It means teacher. He says, don't be called rabbi because you just have one teacher. And then in verse 10, to make matters even more difficult, the word is katheketes, which only occurs here in the Bible and no other places, so there's no way to compare it with another word and know exactly how to render it. The NIV has switched over to instructor. It can mean either teacher or master. Since he's already said teacher in verse 8, I like to render it here as master. Don't be called masters because you have one master, and that is Christ. All right, enough of the detail. Let's look at the big picture. The big picture here is that he's saying, watch out with these titles because people begin to get their heads inflated when you give them titles. He's saying, really, it'd be better off if we don't use titles at all. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't say that somebody is a teacher. He never said that. He calls people teachers. The New Testament calls people teachers. He's saying, just be careful in using that as a title because it'll go to people's heads. And so we want to use as few titles as possible. We can talk about what people do, what their functions are, but we don't want to set up a system that elevates people in their own eyes because it's so easy to do. So easy to do. So here's what Jesus doesn't do. I want you to notice this. All right? He lambasts the Pharisees and the scribes. Tell about how they're hypocrites and they're arrogant. What a lot of people would have Jesus say in verse 8, what a lot of people would have Jesus say in verse 8 is this. So, y'all just get rid of all that. Forget about the organized religion, the institution, the meeting together. Just go and pursue your spirituality on your own, at home, and don't worry about all that. Now, that's what some people have done. They look at the hypocrisy and the arrogance in the church and all the other problems that are going on, and they say, it's not worth it. It would be easier and better if I just pursue my spirituality and my relationship with God on my own. Jesus never says that. And there are reasons for that. But here's the next sentence in our outline. Bad religion is no excuse to ignore the church. Bad religion is no excuse to ignore the church. Jesus, over the years, I've been told this so many times. In fact, I don't hear it quite as much now as I did years ago, but I still hear it from time to time. I'm talking to somebody trying to invite them to church, tell them about Jesus, what have you, and they say, well, I don't believe in organized religion. Now, I have to hold myself back because what I want to say is, well, so you're telling me you believe in disorganized religion? But that sounds cocky. I think I tried it once or twice and realized, Richard, don't say that again. But that's not getting you anywhere. It's better to listen to what the person is saying, try to figure out, where are they coming from? What are they really trying to say here? How do I need to respond to that? That is not just some pat response that makes me feel like I won some argument, because that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. And what they're saying is that they see clearly the problems with religion and church. And I thought a lot about that, and I prayed about it, and I said, Lord, what's going on here? What's the response? How should I think about this? And God told me something else to me that is painfully evident in the Bible, and I should have noticed it before that. And it's this. Jesus went to church, what we would call church, synagogue, temple. Jesus went to church with people who were trying to kill him. But he went anyway. I said, now, when you go to a place where there are people trying to kill you, you're either not very smart, or that place is very, very important to you to make that kind of risk. And so I changed my approach. And when somebody says that to me, I would say, I agree with you. There's a lot of trouble with organized religion. There's a lot of trouble with the church. And there's good and there's bad. And it can be frustrating. It can be easier just to walk away and give up on it. But don't forget this. Jesus really is the one we want to follow. He's what it's all about. That's the person we're focusing on. And if you want to follow Jesus, you'll go to church. If Jesus could go to church with people who were trying to kill him, then I can go to church with somebody who might hurt my feelings every now and then. Okay? So, bad religion is no excuse to ignore the church. I don't need to tell you that. You're here. You're here. I'm telling you that so that you can join me in telling them that. Because there are people throughout our city this morning in Camden, Arkansas, who are sitting at home, they're not in church, because they have gone down a bad road with the church, and they've been hurt. And they need somebody to come to them and just be honest with them and speak to them heart to heart and say, look, I understand that. By the way, my pastor of 7 years ago, in another city, in a church where Karen and I had poured literally our heart and soul into it for 7 years, came to me and said, we needed to leave. And then proceeded to rip the church in half. So, I say that so that you understand that I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be stabbed in the back, trampled on, and kicked in the head in church. And I didn't like it any more than anyone else. But I couldn't stay away because the church is the bride of Christ. I couldn't stay away because every time I followed Jesus, he would go to church. I'd be following Jesus, and he'd turn left and go down to the church, and I'd say, Jesus, can't we turn right and go the other way this morning? He says, no, it's the Lord's day, and I go to church on the Lord's day. And if you want to follow me, you're going to go to the church on the Lord's day. Jesus died for the church. Jesus sees the church as his bride. He loves the church. When we follow Jesus, we go to church. Bad religion doesn't keep us from church when we're following Jesus. Look at the last two verses, 11 and 12. Jesus said, the greatest among you will be the what? Servants. Your servants. You want to be arrogant and hypocritical and great and all that? If you want to be great, that's fine. Here's how you're great in church. Be everybody's servant. So Jesus doesn't say, stop trying to be great. He just redefines greatness. Greatness in the eyes of God is service. And then verse 12. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. By whom? Who does the humbling? Let's get this part right. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Some of them over here know the answer. By whom? By God. Okay, if you didn't say it, I hope you heard it. Because when there is an arrogant and hypocritical person in the church, it's not my job or your job to bring them down. But it feels good, doesn't it? Hallelujah! How the mighty have fallen. But that's God's job. He knows just how, when we do it, we just make them mad and they come back strong. When God does it, their hearts change. So we need to let God do it. All right, back to verse 12. So whoever exalts himself will be humbled by God, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. By whom? By God. Absolutely. Now, and there's some eschatology in this verse too. What does that mean? Well, it means this. Sometimes the exalted don't get humbled until judgment day. Sometimes the humble don't get exalted until vindication day. Now, judgment day and vindication day are the same day. They're the same day. that everybody's going to see it in two different ways. A lot of folks there that day are going to see it as Judgment Day. Others, I hope all of you, you're going to see it as Vindication Day. That the fact that you follow Jesus in this crazy, wacky, dark, messed up world, you will be vindicated on that day. That you did the right thing. You followed the right person. You did exactly what should have been done. You'll be vindicated. You may be vindicated a little bit here and there in this life, but don't forget this. Your major vindication is coming on Vindication Day. All right? They called it V-Day years ago for victory, and it's going to be victory when we get there, let me tell you. All right, so here's the last sentence. Jesus promotes a religion of confidence and humility. Now, I almost didn't use, or confident humility, I almost didn't use the word religion because I know that the word religion has negative connotations, but I used it on purpose because religion, even though it's a bad word, maybe we'll have to throw it out and find another one, I'm still kind of hanging in there because religion is kind of like fire. It can be good or bad. And we need to recognize that. What's happening in throwing out the word religion in our culture is a lot of people are saying the whole thing needs to go. All of it. Reading the Bible, worshiping, believing in God, heaven and hell, it all needs to go. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. What I believe is that we need real religion. And we need to recognize that there is right religion and there is wrong religion. Let's get rid of the wrong religion. Let's not get rid of religion. Because religion speaks of discipline. We are disciples of Christ. When we say we're followers of Jesus, we're disciples, which means we have adopted a discipline of a particular lifestyle that is following Jesus and brings us great joy. So the word itself is not necessarily bad, although I admit sometimes culturally words get such bad connotations that we have to start over again. Yeah, confident humility. I read an article this week about somebody who was talking about humility and leadership and how important it is in leadership. It was an interesting article because they also were asking the question, if humility is so important in leadership, then why are so many leaders so arrogant? He gave some great examples. The first examples he gave were politicians. And I won't mention any names because we'd be here too long. But then he mentioned some other people. He mentioned Jerry Jones. Have you ever heard of him? I'm sorry to just call out names, but it was in the article. And he mentioned others. It wasn't just throwing rocks at him. He was talking about why are so many leaders, if humility is good in leadership, why are so many of them arrogant? And his guess was that they wanted to be ambitious, and they thought that you couldn't be ambitious if you were humble. That if you were really ambitious, you had to be passionate. You had to be arrogant, we would call it. And this guy was saying, no, we need to come up with, we need to point a new term. We need to think of humbition was the word that came up. I kind of like that. Humbition. That's a combination of humility and ambition. I said, well, I like that. I'm going to do that too. All right? I'm going to do that with confidence and humility. Confamility. All right? That's my word. Confamility. Jesus promotes a spirituality of confamility. Tell your workers that. I believe in confamility. All right? And then you'll have to explain it. What does it mean? Well, it means that we're humble, but we're confident. You know, confidence is a cousin of faith. Faith gives us the confidence to say, I may have to lose today because I'm a Christian. And I don't believe in all that backstabbing or whatever else goes on for other people to climb up the ladder. I may have to lose today, but I'm going to win it. I'm going to win it. And it'll be the right kind of win. It'll be the kind of win that God brings. And it brings Him glory and not me. That's the kind of win that I want. Yesterday we spent all day up here in our annual planning meeting. And I want to tell you, I need to say this from time to time, you are blessed at Grace Baptist Church with a really excellent group of deacons and their wives. Okay? You really are. And one of the reasons that some of you may not know that is because, for the most part, they're very humble men and women. They are happy standing something in the background. They don't have to be up on the platform. They don't have to have the spotlight shining on them. They don't have to have their name on everything. And that's a good thing. That you're blessed with this group. They're not perfect. None of us are. But it's a good group. All right? Jackie and Jamie. Tim and Darlene, Jean and Barbara, Tommy and Deborah, Blake and Candy, Jay and Heather, and Bo and Jenny. You're blessed. It's a good group. And I like working with you. And we worked yesterday all day together and prayed and talked about the future of Grace Baptist Church. And we don't always agree. Sometimes we get frustrated with one another. And sometimes it takes a while for us to find what we need to do. But here's the reason it works. Because Jesus is the head of the church, not any of us. And we all know that. We've got our opinions. We got our ways that we like to see things done. But at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, everybody in that room has Jesus as Lord. We want to hear from Him and follow Him. Now, church, I want to thank you also for your affirmation because we recently met together. First of all, thank you for your interest. There are times in the past when we've made important decisions and a handful of people made the decision because there weren't enough people interested to show up, learn about it, and vote on it. And you did show up. You did learn about it, and you did vote on it on this remodel that we're about to start. 91% you affirmed what we're about to do. You know, the 90% is kind of good too because it keeps us a little uncomfortable. We don't want to get arrogant. If we got 100%, we might get a little too arrogant. But 91% said yes. And we thank you for that. We appreciate that. I want to tell you this morning that God has opened the door for this work to begin sooner than we thought. We thought it was going to be March the 1st. It's going to be a week from tomorrow. A week from tomorrow. See, a week from tomorrow, men are going to show up and they're going to start ripping the walls off our Sunday school classrooms and carrying them out and ripping up carpets and all the things that they're going to do and get ready to remake it. So here's what I'm telling you, church. We're about to go through a period of time where our system of church and Sunday school is going to be put under stress and strain. And a lot of times people get along quite well when there's no stress and strain. All of you who are married know what I'm about to say. A little stress on the system. And what happens? You find out where weaknesses are. We're about to have a little stress put on our system, and we're going to find out where our weaknesses are. And we need to be ready for that. We should be on our knees. And we're going to need this confident humility more than anything else. Many of you who have an experience week after week in your Sunday school class, which you love, and I love that. Get ready because your Sunday school experience is about to be taken away from you for a while. Okay? And we have all agreed together to do that for the good that we will get in the evenings. So let's grab onto each other, grab onto the Lord, and be confident-wise, all right? Confident that God's going to do a good thing in this, but we've got to be humble and let Him do this. Would you pray with me?